Archie, ain't we lucky that we're here to see our little girl getting married? Where is the little girl?
Even Jean's closest friends and family were taken aback by her choice when the cameras stopped rolling. She turned to go, not only from the program, but also from the possibility of ever collaborating with Carroll O'Connor again. Nobody understood it at the time. They were the most famous pair on television. How could she simply disappear from both his personal and professional life? Jean Stapleton received offers of tributes, reunion programs, and guest appearances. She turned them all down. She maintained her composure in public, claiming to have moved on from the role. However, there were murmurs. The stress was visible to those who had been on site. The silences caught their attention. According to others, Jean never received the respect she was due. Others think her decision was motivated by something much more personal. The true cause was hidden beneath Hollywood glitz and professional etiquette for decades. However, as time went on, a broader narrative began to emerge from the memoirs, interviews, and casual remarks. Not only about Edith and Archie, but also about Carroll O'Connor and Jean Stapleton. About two celebrities who worked together to create magic, but who, when the spotlight faded, held completely different truths. The pieces finally fit together after years of conjecture. All in the Family revolutionized television when it debuted in 1971. The sugar-coated sitcoms of the 1960s were no more. Something loud, primal, and distinctly real replaced them. Two characters, Edith Bunker, his kind, quiet wife, who somehow made everything feel all right, and Archie Bunker, the loud-mouthed, opinionated everyman, were at the heart of this cultural earthquake. As Archie, Carroll O'Connor was fearless, direct, and memorable, but Jean Stapleton's Edith was the show's real star. Archie would have been intolerable without her. He became human with her. The back and forth between the couple caused audiences to laugh, cry, and occasionally wince, because it seemed familiar in the back of your mind. It was familiar. On-screen chemistry between Jean and Carroll was electrifying. They did more than just play well off each other. In the eyes of millions of viewers, they were each other's property. Fans were astonished by what followed, because they were completely believable. They were not adversaries behind the scenes, but they also weren't particularly close. They were experts, two performers with quite distinct temperaments and techniques. Carroll has a reputation for being overbearing and heavily involved in direction and scripting. Jean was a quiet perfectionist who was passionate about her work, but frequently kept her opinions to herself. Nevertheless, they succeeded for 9 seasons that were unprecedented. The program addressed issues that no sitcom has hitherto dared to address: racism, sexism, war, politics, and religion. Jean's portrayal of Edith served as the audience's anchor each time. Betty's tenderness and humanity softened Archie's hard edges, making Betty the series' soul. Archie was frequently the cause of the audience's laughter, but Edith was nearly always the reason of their tears. And then the Emmys arrived. Carroll O'Connor won 4, Jean Stapleton won 3. But behind the scenes, the cracks were starting to show. Later, friends and insiders would claim that Jean was never quite at ease with the limelight or the course the show was taking. However, the stress was skillfully concealed in those early years. The audience was unaware of what was taking place off-camera. Edith and Archie, America's most troubled yet strangely most adored couple, were all they saw. One of the best teams in television history. But Jean Stapleton was silently keeping count behind the acclaim and the laughing. And she was starting to pose a question to herself that would alter everything. Behind the scenes, her response would trigger a choice that Carroll O'Connor never anticipated. Jean Stapleton was Edith Bunker to millions of fans. However, Jean never saw the role as so straightforward. She was aware right once that the character was a caricature, weak, unsophisticated, and frequently the target of Archie's outbursts. Jean adored the message of the show and thought it could start a discourse, but she found Edith's writing difficult. Edith represented everything Jean was not in many respects. Jean Stapleton was a bright, well-read, and subtly aggressive person in real life. She had put a lot of effort into her acting studies, perfected her craft on stage, and gave each character substance. However, she frequently found herself playing a kind but obedient character on All in the Family. Even when Archie was cruel or degrading, Edith rarely resisted him because she was so devoted to him. Jean started to feel the effects of that discord. She gradually made an effort to offer Edith greater respect by making minor adjustments to her posture, tone, and even how she handled Archie's taunts. Carroll O'Connor also absorbed Jean's grace and wisdom, which softened the writings in ways that audiences noticed and the writers had not intended. Carroll was more than simply the star by the middle of the 1970s. Behind the scenes, he was a powerful figure. He was changing the show's tone, questioning producers, and altering scripts. Although he had keen intuition, he maintained strict control. Even though he frequently asserted that he supported Jean, there were times when she felt creatively constrained. Jean never complained in public, but she started confiding in close friends in private. She was bored of playing Edith, not of acting. Her goal was to develop as an artist, to experiment with different roles that didn't require her to be quiet or obedient. Still, she felt trapped. People treated her like Edith whenever she went out in public. Unaware of how hurtful that nickname was, strangers would call her Dingbat. She started declining interviews with the media. She avoided becoming involved in plots that made Edith appear stupid. Additionally, Jean provided terrible honesty when the writers attempted to give Edith more dramatic sequences, such as her emotional collapse during a terrifying, traumatizing episode. It was her method of demonstrating to the public that Edith was more than just a sidekick and comedic relief. However, those times were infrequent. Jean's uncertainties persisted, as did the creative tension. She began to question whether this was the legacy she wished to leave behind. Did she feel proud of her creation? Of course, but could she do it indefinitely? She wasn't entirely certain. The show was about to undergo a significant change that would try Jean's patience and ultimately drive her over the brink, just as those questions were reaching a breaking point. Because Jean had already begun to distance herself from Carroll O'Connor, who was preparing to exert much more authority. All in the Family was more than a smash by the middle of the 1970s. It was a force of culture. Carroll O'Connor was more than simply the celebrity. He was starting to drive the show. What started off as creative input quickly evolved into complete authority. Authors, producers, and filmmakers were aware that if Carroll didn't approve of something, it probably wouldn't air. His leadership was effective at initially. Carroll was incisive, fervent, and devoted. However, his increasing power led to conflict, particularly with Jean Stapleton. Jean appreciated nuance, yet he pushed for bolder, more dramatic moments. She aimed to convey Edith's range of emotions. He wanted the scenes with Archie to be powerful. Consistently professional, Jean kept her frustrations to herself. However, her silence during rehearsals and table reads was noted by those involved with the production. She would glance at her script, make a few remarks, and then silently agree. It was distance, but not defiance. Their methods of operation were just not compatible. Carroll was frank and assertive. Jean was quiet and kind. Additionally, her role appeared to diminish as his power grew, not in terms of screen time, but rather in terms of creative space. The bond that had propelled the program started to wane, but their warmth never turned to animosity. The turning moment was when Carroll started creating the foundation for Archie Bunker's Place, a spin-off. He wished to continue the tradition. John desired to completely move on. He moved forward. She turned to go. They made a solid, silent choice that stunned everyone around them. No drama, no debates. The ensuing quiet spoke louder than any words could. Fans were devastated when All in the Family's first season ended in 1979, but many remained optimistic. Perhaps Edith would make a comeback in Archie Bunker's Place, the spin-off. In the future, there might be a reunion, a cameo, or a special episode. This was Edith Bunker, after all. She was not just a fictional figure. She was a relative. However, Jean Stapleton made a very clear point. She was finished. She gave a straightforward explanation at the time. She had spent over 10 years in the role. She wanted to explore new possibilities because she believed Edith's narrative had been presented in its entirety. It seemed noble, even sensible. However, that story started to show flaws as the years went by. Insiders provided an alternative perspective behind the scenes. They said that Jean was emotionally spent due to the gradual, unrelenting loss of creative freedom as well as the monotony of weekly programming. She was tired of attempting to mold a figure who was more and more constrained and stuck in a world she no longer trusted. There was Carroll O'Connor after that. There were whispers of separation between them, but Jean never publicly chastised him. There was an implicit tension that grew more intense as the show went on, rather than blatant animosity. According to those on the set, Jean believed Carroll's personality had taken over the show's soul as well as the writing room. It felt like control now, instead of partnership. And the once calm focal point of the play, Edith, started to disappear. Apparently didn't appreciate the spin-off's path. The spark, and more crucially, the heart of the original, were absent from Archie Bunker's Place. Archie was just Archie, without Edith. Furthermore, Jean had no desire to support a concept that she no longer supported. She refused even when producers promised her a final on-screen farewell episode. After a while, the show shocked viewers with a phrase explaining Edith's absence. Off-screen, she had died in between seasons. No farewell, no last moment, simply gone. John made that choice. Even for closure, she didn't want to go back. Edith was over in her eyes. Additionally, her friendship with Carroll O'Connor was firmly but discreetly closed. Years later, Jean continued to be kind and diplomatic in interviews. However, she sidestepped a straight question about working with Carroll once more. She turned around. She grinned. She never did, however, say yes. Not once. Some thought she was injured. She was simply ready to move on, according to others. In actuality, though, it might have been something more profound, a personal boundary she had set and would never cross again. And despite his presence and strength, Carroll O'Connor was powerless to influence her. Carroll O'Connor had never held back. He never held back when discussing politics, narrative, or production choices. However, he was extremely selective about what he said about Jean Stapleton. When questioned about her after she left All in the Family, Carroll's tone remained polite, almost reverent. In interview after interview, he praised her abilities and referred to her as irreplaceable. However, there was a persistent sense of loss concealed behind the nice remarks, a silent remorse that never really went away. In an attempt to preserve the original show's success, even in Jean's absence, he had constructed Archie Bunker's Place to continue its legacy. However, the distinction was clear. Carroll gave excellent performances, and the spin-off had its moments, but something was lacking. The soft voice that had counterbalanced Archie's bluster, the series' soul, was gone, and nobody was able to cover that void. Carroll was aware of it. The audience was aware of it. Even those reviewers who praised the original started observing the new show's emotional emptiness. Archie's outbursts seemed crueler and less endearing without Edith. Edith's compassion had once evoked his vulnerability, but now it had nowhere to go. John had clearly been more than a supporting character. The entire show had revolved around her. Carroll's public remarks gradually changed. He ceased to speculate about a potential comeback. He stopped recommending reunion specials. Additionally, he provided a tactful response when questioned why Jean never returned. She was no longer there, but according to others close to him, her absence was very noticeable. Carroll allegedly admitted in private that he missed her as a stabilizing influence as well as a scene partner. John had been composed, competent, and subtly strong on set. Her presence grounded the turmoil, yet she never raised her voice. The set was different without her. It was louder and less well-balanced. After Jean left, Carroll said in a rare interview years later that the show was never the same. He went so far as to refer to her leaving as the end of an era. However, he never explained why she actually left. He never admitted that she might have been driven away by his own expanding power. We may never know if he didn't know or didn't want to go there. It is evident that their relationship never recovered its previous state. For tributes, they didn't get back together. For sentimental interviews, they did not appear on the same stage. They parted ways. On screen, two legends were inextricably intertwined, but they discreetly separated off it. And there was one struggle he was unable to win for Carroll O'Connor, who had battled for creative control over everything else. It was Jean Stapleton's decision. Additionally, he had no retort, in contrast to a lot of his TV standoffs, because Jean never raised her voice to say what she needed to say in the end. Scandal and attention were never Jean Stapleton's style. She stayed firmly grounded in seclusion and grace, even as others profited from books and candid interviews. However, she revealed just enough over the years to show that she did not make the decision to leave the family and never work with Carroll O'Connor again lightly. Jean gave a few interviews in the years following her departure. Carroll was never beaten by her. The network was never criticized by her, the authors, or the business, but she also never made any indication that she would want to go back. She spoke carefully, often to the point of being evasive. However, there were brief, illuminating moments within those circumspect answers. She would answer, "I'm proud of the work," with a gentle grin when asked if she missed the program. She would say she adored Edith, but thought her journey was finished when asked about the character. This is something she never done, was show any desire to return to that milieu, not even as a guest or as a tribute. She openly commended Carroll's skill, describing him as a talented actor and expressing her gratitude for the opportunity to collaborate with him. However, even those accolades were frequently followed by a polite reroute. She would bring up the subject of theater, her work on TV films, or her passion for Shakespeare. She seems to have put a line around every member of the family, and she never again permitted herself to cross it. She was asked by a journalist in one particularly striking interview what made Edith so adored. "Edith had empathy," Jean said. "She paid attention. She was very concerned. And I believe her heart was seen by others." The interviewer then inquired as to whether John shared this perspective of herself. After a moment, John remarked, "Edith and I were very different. I'm an actress. That is not the world I live in." It was a straightforward yet impactful response. After years of portraying a lady who was devoted and submissive, she was suddenly, subtly reminding everyone that she was an independent woman who made her own choices, even if they were unexpected. She declined specials about reunions. She turned down requests to appear in retrospectives or documentaries about the show again. Jean was conspicuously missing from major award events, even when all in the family received recognition. She was thought to be too private by some. Others thought there might be more to the story, and they might be right. She made it apparent that her leaving was final, On the few occasions she did discuss it. She believed in closure, but she was not one to harbor resentment, and with quiet dignity, she locked the door of Edith Bunker after closing it. Fans kept asking if she would ever come back, even for a moment to think, as the years passed. Would she and Carroll ever get together again to discuss their remarkable work? The solution? For Jean Stapleton, it was never about drama or resentment. Thus, the answer was always no. When something, even something lovely, no longer suited who she was becoming, it was about principle, about putting peace over duty, and about leaving it behind. However, one more clue that altered everything appeared just when everyone thought the narrative was over. Jean Stapleton stayed out of the public eye in her final years. She went back to her theater origins and assumed parts that allowed her to go beyond Edith Bunker. She took on Shakespeare, played Eleanor Roosevelt, and worked with dignity and grace all the way to the end. However, everyone in the family followed her wherever she went. Fans continued to refer to her as Edith, recall her soft smile and high voice, and think she was Archie Bunker's. Jean, however, had made up her mind and never turned back. Jean was questioned once more in one of her final interviews about why she never came back, not even for a cameo or tribute. Her response was concise and composed. That aspect of my life is now complete. Through Edith, I've expressed everything I can. It was a limit, not merely a rejection. John's comment in a less well-known profile years ago changed everything. The freedom to choose was her response when asked what she appreciated most about her job. The true success lies in that, to decide when to start and when to stop. There was weight in that one line. Perhaps Carroll O'Connor wasn't the only subject of the story. Perhaps it had to do with what he stood for: pressure, control, and a storytelling format in which her voice wasn't always heard. Jean's departure was a rejection of that world, not of him. In 2001, Carroll died. Although he had never been critical of Jean, he had also never given a thorough explanation of their relationship. Maybe he didn't even know. He did mention that everyone in the family lost their heart without Jean Stapleton. The tributes to Jean, who passed away in 2013, were heartfelt, reverent, and awe-inspiring. However, there was only quiet and introspection, no reunions or prearranged farewells, and the answer was in that stillness. Timing had always made sense to John Stapleton.